Understanding focal length is an important part of how to tell your story, whether it's through photos or videos. For example, a photo taken at 17mm will make your photo look larger than life and have a surreal look, while a photo taken at 28mm will look a bit more natural and true to life. So in this video, I'll teach you all about focal lengths and which scenarios you'll want to use those specific focal lengths in. Before we get into it, if you haven't already, I highly recommend that you check out my video on sensor size and crop factor, because the size of your camera sensor does have a direct impact on which focal lengths you'll be using. Okay, so first, what is focal length? Or better yet, what does it do? In the simplest terms, focal length is a measurement of how wide or how tight your field of view is. And focal length is measured in millimeters, so the smaller the number, the wider the angle, the larger the number, the tighter the angle. All right, so first let's talk about 16mm, or in my case, it's gonna be 17mm because that's the widest my lens will go, but this is considered ultra wide. This is gonna give you an ultra wide field of view, so you're gonna capture a ton in your frame. And this can make your shots look very immersive and very grand. I like to use this focal length for POV shots where I wanna get up close to my object, and it can make your audience feel like they're with you wherever you're at. It's also a great focal length for vlogging because you can hold your camera at an arm's distance and still capture yourself and a few other subjects in your frame. You can also use it for some experimental portraits at high or low angles, and you can have your subject put their hand in front of the frame, and it will have this really unique distorted look that you can't get with other focal lengths. Another instance can be for real estate photography and videography because it will allow you to capture the entire room, for example. All right, next let's talk about 24 to 28mm, which these are going to be considered standard wide angle lenses. I would consider this a great focal length for documenting everyday life because you can capture your subject and also a ton of the environment in the background to give your photo some context. And it's not going to have as much distortion or that fisheye look that your ultra wide lenses will have, but it'll still be wide enough to capture your subject and a ton of the environment in the background. And if you have an iPhone, for example, the main 1x lens is going to be a 26mm lens, so I can give you a better idea of what that focal length will look like. And in my opinion, it's just a perfect point and shoot everyday focal length. Next focal length is 35mm, which is still considered a wide angle lens. This is a really popular focal length for street photography because you can walk around, take some quick shots, and it's not too wide that your photo will feel too zoomed out, but it's also not too tight where you're not going to get enough in your frame. This is also a fun focal length for filming mini documentaries because if you take a couple steps back, you can still show your subject and their environment and still having some separation from your background, or you can take a couple steps closer and get more of a detail shot. Next up is 50mm, which this focal length is equivalent to the field of view that our eyes actually see. So this is a great focal length if you want a natural, real-world field of view, and to me it really shines if you want to take portraits. And set your aperture to something like an f2.8 or wider, and you'll get some nice background blur and really isolate your subject in your frame. And for video, this can be really nice if you need a close-up shot of your subject, and it can really separate your subject from the background to make them pop. Next up is 70 to 200mm, which these are considered telephoto focal lengths. And on the wider side of telephoto lenses, like an 85mm lens, this is also great for taking portraits and really separating your subject from your background. And anything past that, like 200mm or more, is great if you want to capture subjects that are at a far distance, like surfing, for example. And lastly, let's talk about compression and background blur, because your focal length actually has a huge difference on that. I took the same portrait at various focal lengths so you can compare the differences. First noticeable difference in focal lengths is facial distortion. The wider the lens, the more distorted faces look, and the tighter the lens, the less facial distortion you'll get. Next, comparing 24 and 35mm, another difference you'll notice is how the tighter the focal length, the more compression, which basically means as you zoom in more, your background will look closer, aka more compressed. Next, comparing the 35 and 50mm, another key difference you'll notice is in background blur. All shots were taken at f2.8, but the tighter the lens, the more background blur that will be. Lastly, comparing 17 and 70mm, you can really see a huge difference with all the factors I mentioned before, like facial distortion, compression, and background blur. So anyways, that is all for this video. If you do have any questions, be sure to let me know down in the comments below. And if you want to see more tutorials, be sure to like and subscribe. Huge thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.